Video. Morning. Welcome, everybody. This is Kind Productivity, and I'm going to talk to you in this session about kindness. Joining on a day that is so lovely outside, it just makes me doubly honoured that you are here with us. So thank you for joining. Those of you who don't know me, so I'm the founder of a company called Think Productive, which I'm sure many of you know already. The author of 5, soon to be 6 books. So I've finished the 6th book, which is all about kindness. It's coming. Bound to get questions about that later. When's it coming up? But yeah, most notably, the book How to Be a Productivity Ninja, which has been a global bestseller, and the founder of Think Productive, which basically takes all the learning from that book into companies around the world, alongside lots of other things that we do as well. And one of our company values is trust and kindness are our rocket fuel. So, you know, I often get that question when I'm talking about kindness, productivity, like how do they fit together? Well, actually, I think they're much more closely linked than you would think, and hence the name of this session being Kind Productivity. I do think there's a very strong link, which I'm about to share with you. I was going to say as well, there's going to be questions at the end. So Katie, you've just raised your hand. We will come back to do questions at the end. So unless it's like a tech thing, in which case DM me if you can't hear me or something. So let's talk about kindness and its link to productivity. So if you've read How to Be a Productivity Ninja, or you know the work of Think Productive, then you'll know that one of our sort of key messages is the idea that a productivity ninja is human, not superhero. And what that means is when you adopt all of the productivity techniques that I talk about, you will probably find yourself, you know, sort of gliding through the office and gliding through life with everybody else looking at you a little bit like, Graham must be some kind of superhero. He's got it all together. He knows what he's doing and all this kind of stuff. And of course, the message there is that's just not the case. So we are all humans. We all have limits. We all bring with us to our work all kinds of biases and foibles and baggage and all sorts of stuff that actually affect how we work and how we can be productive. And the best way I can describe it is we're often productive despite all of our human weirdness, not because of. And yeah, it can look like we have special powers, but a ninja is just a human being with good skills and a good mindset and occasional screw-ups as well. So I think that's a really important place to start, in saying that, you know, work is messy and humans are weird and work is complicated. And so I think for me, what makes organizations productive, what makes organizations good places to work, good places that you want to stay at and have good retention levels and all the rest of it, is when you do have a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of connection. And for me, that comes from really embracing the humanness as a really core part of the work that we do. I think that's not always how we see life. I would love you to just think about the last sort of inspirational business stuff that you scrolled past on Instagram or that popped up on your YouTube, and what you'll see or saw on TV. And what you'll see in a lot of those cases is there's a kind of story that we're told about the kind of people who are successful at work, and particularly as entrepreneurs. And that story goes something like this: when you are prepared to be like a bit more ruthless and a bit more of a bastard, then when you do that, you trample over lots of other people and you kind of snatch their coins and, you know, you trample over them to get to the top. That's how it all works. And the problem is that's just not true. It's a complete myth, actually, but it's a very compelling myth. And the reason it's a compelling myth is that the idea of the business bastard is just a very interesting story. We would always much rather watch the bad guys in the movies than the good guys in the movies, right? So we have this sort of innate bias towards those kind of stories, but in reality, we're missing so much there. So we're missing survivorship bias. All of those people who behaved really poorly and then didn't succeed, we don't think about those people because they're just not famous or not known. We also don't think about all of the support that goes on around someone like a Steve Jobs or a Donald Trump or the dragons from Dragon's Den, which I'll come back to in a minute. In, you know, lots of other much kinder people who are going around and kind of sweeping up the mess that they leave behind. And so whilst the Mr. Burns, and, you know, you're right back to Ebenezer Scrooge and Shylock in Hamlet, there's all these sort of notions that, you know, business somehow involves being mean and evil. You know, when we think about all of those kind of stories, we miss out all the people who are just a bit less remarkable because their stories aren't quite so extreme, who are doing really great work, becoming really successful without having to trample over lots of other people. So I call this the business bastard continuum, right? So we just have this assumption that, like, the more of a bastard we are, the more successful we're going to be. So that's what's on the left of your screen there. What I think is actually true is completely the opposite, with a few outliers. So Steve Jobs being the outlier on here. And so what we need to do is move away from this kind of world that we've built ourselves, you know, in media, in film, in TV, of this kind of business bastard narrative, and really start to move away from those old heroes and focus on some newer heroes. So I'm going to just share with you some of who I think the new heroes are. And then I'm going to give you some real practical sort of tips and tricks around just how to instill a bit more kindness at work, and just hopefully inspire you to do a bit more around that as well. So let's talk about some new heroes. So on the left, we've got Mary Portas, written a book recently about how to make business kinder. She started her career, she's kind of probably best known as Mary, Queen of Shops, but started as, you know, someone window dressing in big department stores in London. Really kind of iconic name in fashion. And in the last few years has really realized not only the unkindness that was part of some of her teams, but also how unkind to the planet so much of that sort of fast fashion culture is, has really kind of railed against, you know, where she kind of started from. Bottom left there is Nick Jenkins. He's the founder of moonpig.com and was also one of the dragons on Dragon's Den. Now, what's really interesting about Nick Jenkins is, so I interviewed Nick Jenkins for my podcast a while ago, and I was talking to him about his approach to Dragon's Den. So he only did one season on Dragon's Den, and then they kind of cancelled him and took him off. I think he was happy to do more. And basically, when I was talking to him about this, I said, well, your role on Dragon's Den seemed to be that even if you didn't want to invest, you had something kind to say to all of the you know, people pitching to you. So you'd give people really good advice, you'd really help people out. And I was like, were you consciously trying to take on that role in the Den, because that just didn't really exist in the Den before? And he said, no, not at all. That's just how I built my business. I just built my business by generally trying to be useful and kind to people. And so I just thought I'd do the same thing within Dragon's Den. So I think that there's something really interesting about that, is that he took that approach and the TV people just thought it wasn't good telly. So doesn't that tell you a lot? Because he is obviously super successful. On the right there, you've got Tony Hsieh and Oprah, people who are very tuned into the ideas of like employee happiness, human happiness, and also just human empathy. I think just very inspiring people to be around and to work for. Tony Hsieh was also very kind to give me a quote for Productivity Ninja, which was just a really proud moment for me, because he was a kind of really big hero of mine. And then in the middle, John Timson. So if you don't know the story of Timson's is in the UK, the shop where you go if you need your shoes mended or your keys cut and other things like that. I don't know why shoes and keys are always in the same shop. I don't think it's the same machine. I don't know how that works. If you know, let me know. But basically, Timson have really made a big deal in the last few years of being a company that is fueled by kindness. So they do that in a whole bunch of different ways. They give all of their staff free rein within a certain budget to just do kind things when their customers come in. So there's all these stories of, you know, customers coming in, and there was one customer who had like a spinal brace, and the brace, his daughter had this like spinal brace on. The brace was broken, and obviously Timson don't repair those things, but the guy worked out that through his machines and through a bit of fiddling around, he could actually just mend this spinal brace that was going to take weeks, you know, to send back to the doctors and do and all this, and just totally change this little girl's life by being able to wear the brace again. And there's just 1,000 stories like that. Generally, you tend to end up in a Timson at a time of stress in your life, right? Like either your shoe is broken on the way to an interview, or you're getting your keys cut because you just moved house, and so you're surrounded by stress. So they really empower their staff to bring kindness to customers. And then also internally, they have a whole set of policies which are really kind too. So they have a whole bunch of holiday homes that they've bought, which are available exclusively to Timson staff to just go and have a holiday. They give you days off for your birthday. If your child starts a new school, you get that day off. If your pet dies, you get that day off. So there's all these little policies that are built in to basically say, let's embrace the humanness of our staff, and let's really tell those stories and bring people to life, rather than everyone just feeling like they're kind of a small cog in a really big wheel. So I think Timson is just a really good example of not just kindness, but also telling stories through kindness as well. So one of the things they do is every month they have this kind of kindness challenge where all the staff get to share the stories of, this is what I did this month, and this is what I did this month, and then people get given prizes around it. So it really instills this momentum of kindness. And there's lots of science that says if you experience kindness, either when you're the receiver or you're the giver of kindness, or you're just a witness for kindness, then actually it releases dopamine and oxytocin and other chemicals in your brain that make you want to go and do more of that. So they're really big into using the stories to just fuel this really positive, kind human culture, all really centered around kindness at Timson's. And we can't talk about the new heroes of kindness without talking about Jacinda Ardern. So I was super inspired by the approach that she took through the COVID crisis, and really the contrast of the way she dealt with that time versus the way that lots of leaders, you know, in our country and in the US and many other countries were dealing with COVID. So if you think about the kind of response to COVID that we had here, it was all very much like, well, there'll be a vaccine along soon, and you know everything's fine, and you know, and very much kind of like we are standing behind these podiums and talking at you in this in very kind of authoritative way. And Jacinda was very different in terms of her approach. So she said things like, you know, we are tough people here in New Zealand, like, let's do this together. I know you can do this, but it's going to be hard. She didn't sugarcoat the fact that the truth of the situation was a really difficult thing. She also did something which I thought was really powerful, where she basically just hung around on some Facebook Lives, which she set up, and she just said, I'm here, come and ask me questions, you know, fire away, like, what do you need to know? Like, you know, are you scared? Like, what's happening? And just really just to kind of hold that space and kind of be with people through that situation, so that people could really just connect with her directly with their concerns. And, you know, just a very human, you know, very humble approach to being a world leader at that time. And obviously her results in terms of the sort of death rate in New Zealand versus lots of other parts of the world were phenomenal. So, you know, this is stuff that really pays off, which we believe as well. So within Think Productive, we have this corporate value of trust and kindness are our rocket fuel. In the process of writing this book around kindness, I did lots of research around this, and I realized that this thing that we'd put together, so this idea of trust and kindness are our rocket fuel, we've kind of carried this little mantra for many years. But we just kind of knew it worked for us. But then in the sort of process of writing the book, I uncovered a lot of the science in terms of why it works more generally, and like why it's a useful way to approach building teams and building culture. So basically, when you have kindness, when you experience kindness, there's lots of science that says that builds empathy and builds trust. And so what's happening there is sort of twofold. One, when you're the witness of kindness, you're starting to see the humanness of someone else. But also, if you make a culture of kindness, or you have the intention personally of, I'm going to try and do something kind, well, what's the next question you have in your mind after you've resolved to do something kind? It's like, what do people need? So it just builds that empathy and builds that trust as you start to kind of focus on kindness as a thing that you want to do as a positive intention. And once you build trust, you can start to get to a place where people feel psychologically safe. So this is a phrase that was really popularized by a psychologist called Amy Edmondson. And you've probably come across the idea of psychological safety. It often, I think, feels like one of those HR-y terms that it's like, how do I make this real? But basically, the idea of psychological safety is that you're able to, within a team, within a kind of group environment, you feel safe enough to take interpersonal risks. So that might be, I've got a really good idea for this project, but it feels like one of those odd ideas that might be ridiculed, so I'll just hold back. Whereas if you feel psychologically safe, you're happy to put your hand up and say, yeah, I've got this like slightly harebrained idea. What do you think about this? And actually just throw it in there. Or you might have, so if you've seen the dramatization of the Chernobyl disaster and that sort of big documentary series, so many times there, people should have raised the alarm, but they didn't feel psychologically safe because they were in this, communist system where, if you raise the alarm, you get punished, or it kind of is seen as failure. So the alarm didn't get raised, and look what happened. So it's really important actually for physical safety to have that psychological safety too. But psychological safety also just means being able to give people the right kind of feedback, to tell the right kind of truth, and really to communicate regularly enough in a way that drives performance and is really kind of for the project rather than for self-preservation. So psychological safety is just really at the heart of great performance and just good, high-performing teams. But kindness is one of those really important keys that can get you there. If you want to do some more reading around the idea of psychological safety, what I'd really encourage you to do is look at some of the results that psychologically safe organizations have that psychologically unsafe organizations don't. So you have much more creativity. People are much happier to express their ideas. There's much better critical thinking, better engagement. There's better employee retention. People don't want to leave. The team performs better. You have more innovation. You have more productivity. So all of this comes from, being able to experience an organization where you feel part of the team, valued, that your ideas are taken care of, and that actually you matter and that you can have a say. And really, I think in many ways, just the idea of telling somebody that they matter is, you're halfway to kindness if you can just really adopt that kind of approach. At this point, it's worth busting one of the other myths that comes up around kindness. So a lot of people say, well, isn't being kind, isn't that a bit weak? And it's like, no, you're confusing that with nice. So I think there's a massive difference between being kind and just being nice. And you can summarize that as saying, well, nice is about saying what people want to hear, and kind is about saying what people need to hear. So true kindness is about marrying up truth and grace at the same time. So you're giving people that truth. You're committed to the truth of the situation, but you're also giving it in a way that is gracious and much more kind, and in a way that people can really receive that information in a way that is safe for them. So what that means is kindness is not the easy option. Kindness is actually very brave and skillful. It takes really incredible communication. Kindness can be quite badass. It's actually the opposite, weak. But nice cultures, we've probably all experienced those kind of nice cultures where it's like, something goes really badly in a meeting or whatever, and then that person asks for feedback, and it's like everyone goes, yeah, it's fine, and no one really says the truth of the situation. So really important to move away from the idea of nice, but really embrace in its place kindness, and actually taking that skill and bravery and being for the other person enough to really kind of give them the information that they need. So yeah, I think nice and kind, they're often sort of interchangeable words, but to really kind of focus on, okay, what's the kind thing in this situation, rather than what's the nice thing. Just a few other examples of that. So the idea of in a meeting, the sort of, we've all been in those meetings where it's like the go along to get along thing, right? Where people are just really agreeable in the meeting, and then after the meeting, they sort of bitch about that person behind their back. And also just one thing that's really kind is to really acknowledge, hey, like, we disagree on this thing, but we can do that respectfully. I think that's an art form that we've really lost just in culture over the last few years. And also saying no can be really kind too. So that slightly feels a bit counterintuitive when it comes to productivity, but I think it's a really important thing to be honest. So quite often think of kindness and this idea of truth and grace as it's almost like the salted caramel, right? So like you need that bit of salt, that bit of truth, but also you're doing it in a way that kind of sugarcoats it enough that it is acceptable and actually can be, when it's done right, absolutely delicious. We all know that salted caramel is the best chocolate. Right, so let's do, I'm going to do 5 intentional acts of kindness. So really making this practical. And then in the last 15 minutes or so, we're just going to open it up for some Q&A. I want to hear what you think, throwing lots of ideas at you. I want to hear how you feel like this applies to the work that you're doing. So let's start with a ninja is human and not superhero. And I think embracing our humanness is really powerful. So I'll give you an example of this. So Elena, who's Think Productive's MD, she's on holiday at the moment. And so Elena, if you're watching this back another time, then hello. So Elena is just such a powerhouse and really like super organized, super productive. Like it's very, very rare that Elena ever does anything at work where she's screwed up in any way. And then occasionally, because she's human, she'll send me that email, once a year or something. And I will always use it as a little joke to send us something back that goes like, hooray, you're human after all. Isn't that amazing? And almost like using your screw ups or using someone else's screw ups as an opportunity to just really say, isn't it amazing how like rare this is that this happens and how well you do everything else? And, I think that's a really nice way of embracing humanness. We start a lot of our meetings at Think Productive with some version of a check-in. So just how are you feeling today? Like what's happening for you right now? So just giving people that moment to just be themselves, to express what's on their mind. And people share, often some quite emotional things on there. I was on one a couple of weeks ago where I felt okay enough to say, just feeling really sad today. Just put that on the table, but like, let's carry on. It's okay. And I think it's a really important thing just to, not to become a sort of counseling session, but just for those few minutes at the beginning, giving people that human emotional check-in. The other one I really like is just what's going well or what you're looking forward to as questions, because it often brings people into, I'm really looking forward to the weekend. I'm going to this gig. It's really exciting. Or, hey, I'm going to see my grandkids. Like whatever the thing is, just giving people that little bit of space and that little moment to be human in and around a meeting. Also just remembering things like, giving people duvet days, like if people feel ill, like really encouraging people to take that time and rest, recognizing that as humans, we have limitations and, we do need that little bit of downtime to be cut a little bit more slack at times. And often we treat ourselves with much less kindness than we treat other people. So once we see that as a pattern, and once I know that other people are doing that too, well, I can really jump in with 2 feet and make sure I'm treating that person with double kindness to make up for the fact that they're going to treat themselves with a bit less kindness. And just kind of trying to remove guilt, right? I just feel like so much of my work around productivity is really about people's fear and people's guilt, and just recognizing that when people feel guilty, they tend to make less kind decisions for themselves when perhaps they do just need a bit more downtime, a bit more rest, a bit more time away, an extra week on the project, whatever that might look like. People first, work second, always. This became a bit of a mantra for me a few years ago when it seemed like everyone in the Think Productive team had just really difficult things going on in their personal lives. And the idea of this is to say, like when that happens, when you have lots of stuff going on, cut people that extra slack, but also just, really make it okay for people to drop what they're doing, go and attend to what's going on at home. You will not be thinking about your work when you've got some, really big crisis going on at home. So I was really inspired. I remember watching a Jamie Oliver thing a few years ago where he had someone in the kitchen who had, I think, just gone through a breakup or something. She was in a really bad place. She arrived for work and just, you could tell she was just not in a good headspace. And he was like, we'll pick up the slack here. You go home. Like, you're not going to be in the right headspace. Just go and do you and then come back. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge, that people are going to have some tough times in their lives. And when they have that tough time, that everybody else in the team has got their back. The always in that little mantra, people first, work second, always, becomes really important because it's really powerful to think that it's always somebody's always. There's always somebody in your team that maybe needs a bit more support, maybe might need some time away, maybe it's just struggling, And just having that mindset of like, I'm going to look out for who's always it is right now, like who needs me right now, who needs a bit more support right now. And the idea is that, when that's you drop everything and everybody else picks up around you. And when it's someone else, you support them. And, you like that interplay between, what goes around comes around there, I think is really, really important. Being able to really confidently let go and just trust that everybody else will pick stuff up for me and it's going to be okay, is really powerful. I actually had to do that myself a little while ago when I wasn't feeling well. I took some time away, and it felt really good knowing that I could trust that everyone would handle stuff, which they did. But do you know what? That goes from sort of building a culture over many years where I've been the person handling stuff for other people, many, many times. So what goes around comes around with that stuff. I think it's a really, really important way to think about teams. And then listening. So I think one of the most underrated skills, actually, just in business as well as in life, is around how do we listen? How do we really listen? How do we listen more deeply? And I've been really on a journey with that myself over the last few years, particularly writing the book as well, and just researching how different people approach listening. But I think really important to create the safety, again, that psychological safety, to really make listening genuine and authentic, and make it okay for people to express the whole 100% of what they want to say, and really kind of iron out some of those issues. One of the things we do at Think Productive is we talk about the idea of stinky fish, which is basically like, hey, here's a thing that if we don't attend to this, it might just really start to just feel a lot worse than it does right now. So let's just nip it in the bud and just talk about it now. And it's just a nice way of being able to address some of those issues before they get to the point where they're really difficult. So asking in meetings things like, what are your concerns? Like actually just making the assumption that someone will have a concern. Asking questions like, what are your hopes and what are your fears? Because that allows you to build the optimism and the positivity, but it also allows you to go, hey, is there something, even though we're going to do this, is there something that still doesn't feel quite right about it? So let's try and address that while we still do it. Asking people the question, where are you stuck? Again, so people don't need to feel embarrassed about being stuck. It's much better if your starting point is someone will be stuck and that it's okay to be stuck. That's a much kinder way than just assuming that we're all superheroes and then, people feeling embarrassed or feeling unable to say when something isn't quite as it seems. And then the final one is vote first, discuss second. So we all kind of have these biases. So there's proximity bias. You have in a meeting the bias to the people who are sat right next to you. There's the hippo effect bias, which is basically the highest paid person's opinion. So if your boss is in the room, so like let's say if your boss says, I think the budget for this should be £2,000 and you were thinking 5, then when it gets around to your turn to say what you think the budget is, you probably go £2,500, £3,000. So you anchor your own point of view to what that hippo person is, the highest paid person's opinion. And so doing the voting first is much kinder because it allows people to really say what they really think. And then you get much more of a diversity of opinions, and you'll have a better conversation if someone thinks it's 2 and someone thinks it's 5. So really important to just kind of create those spaces and ways to listen and the structures that allow us to have much better conversations. And speaking of which, so opening rounds, I think, are a really positive thing. So one of the ones we use so this comes from Nancy Klein and her book, The Thinking Environment. The book is called Time to Think. And so one of hers is just how are you feeling and one thing that's going well. And then she ends it with, what did you value about this meeting and what's the one thing you're looking forward to? So I do with a lot of the meetings that we have, and we talk about this in my book, How to Fix Meetings as well, actually, is this idea of opening and closing round. It takes a couple of minutes, but it gives you that sort of emotional arrival, emotional check-in at the beginning. And also it means that the meeting finishes feeling rounded and satisfying and on a positive reality because you're sort of looking forward at the end as well. So really worth just the 3, if it's a meeting with like 5 or 6 people, that'll take you no more than like 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning, another 2 or 3 minutes at the end. But like that little investment of that time really makes meetings just feel much more complete, and people feel much more listened to. And also the best thing about the opening round is that once you've said something at the beginning, you're warmed up. So if the next thing you were going to say is a bit more controversial, you already have that little bit more psychological safety and trust to actually just step forward with the thing that just kind of feels a bit more difficult. And then kind emails. So just really using emails and Slack messages, Teams messages, those kind of things as a way to just really instill a bit of kindness. So emojis are obviously, great on Teams and Slack and stuff, but just, putting things in there like, I love your work today. Like, you're doing really great stuff. Or I saw this and I thought of you, and sending someone the forward to the website page that you found or whatever. And just really just kind of, every email that you send is an opportunity to just throw a little bit of kindness somebody's way as well. So I just encourage you, your inbox is this afternoon, just to think about that question. And then just before we get into the Q&A, I'm going to set you a little challenge. So there's a little tradition which originated in the coffee shops of Naples in the 1950s, and it's called Caffè Sospeso, which translates as suspended coffee. And the idea is, if you go into the coffee shop and you're feeling good today, you just got paid, you got a bit of money, you buy your coffee, and then you also buy another coffee, and you say, I'm putting that in Caffè Sospeso. So you're buying a suspended coffee, and that sits in the jar. And then if someone's coming in, they don't have the change on them that day, or they don't have money, then someone can come in and say, hey, can I just claim a coffee from the Caffè Sospeso jar? And so they take out that coffee that you just paid for, and they get to cash that in. It's a really simple little idea, but just think about the science of what's happening with that Caffè Sospeso jar. So every time someone in the queue witnesses someone putting something into the Caffè Sospeso jar, that person just feels really great about that little coffee shop. They think, isn't this a great thing that we do here? And you have that little dopamine hit, that little oxytocin release as well. It just feels really good to witness that act of kindness. The same thing happens every time someone takes something out of the jar. And the staff will have that same feeling too, right? So every time something goes in or something goes out, they're witnessing these little acts of kindness all day and all night. It just becomes this really positive environment. And what's really interesting about it is when you think about what did the coffee shop owner actually have to do to make all of that happen? All it was is, one, they had to find a jar and they had to write Caffè Sospeso on it. And that's basically it. So we can all go through our day and our week, adding more kindness to our meetings, to our emails, to the world around us, to communication that we're having, and to everybody that we're talking to, every interaction. But also as leaders, as managers, and also just as colleagues, we also have the opportunity to create vessels for kindness. So we have the opportunity, if we're chairing a meeting, to introduce a little slot in the meeting where you talk about gratitude for each other, or you do a little emotional check-in like I just mentioned at the beginning. So that is you being the jar, right? So like you're creating the little excuse so that everybody else can jump into the idea of kindness. And I think there's something really powerful about that. That's really when I talk about kindful leadership. That's the kindful part. It's really kind of thinking about how can I create little structures, little moments, little spaces so that everybody else can jump into being kinder. What you'll find is that people don't really need an excuse to do that. People really jump at the idea of being kinder, saying kinder things, doing kinder things, taking action. What people often need is just that little bit of inspiration, that little excuse at the beginning, to just know that it's okay to do that. So I want to leave you with that and this idea of Caffè Sospeso. And so my question to you is, not only how can you be kinder in your interactions, but also how can you be the vessel for other people's kindness? How can you create those little structures, those little spaces so that other people can be kind too? That's Caffè Sospeso. So we've got a few minutes for questions. Just if you are not aware, I do this weekly email. So if you like some of the stuff I've just been talking about, I'm going to be sharing some more thoughts on kindness as part of my weekly email. It's called Rev Up for the Week. It's free. It goes out every Sunday at 4:05 p.m. I just picked that time once. It seemed to work. And the idea is it's a positive or productive thought for the week ahead, often along the lines of productivity, often along the lines of kindness. So very much in the space of this webinar. So yeah, sign up for that if you want to. Just go to grahamallcott.com to do that. And then as of next Wednesday, with Atlanta's answer to Brené Brown, the amazing Chris Kisley, we are running a 6-week course on Kindful Leadership. It's on Zoom. It's a couple of hours on a Wednesday evening UK time, so afternoon if you're in the States, and it's called Kindful Leadership. It'll be a small little community led by me and Chris, WhatsApp group to keep everyone accountable. We'll set you some challenges. And the idea is that will really just help you to think about kindness in a different way. If you want to sign up for that, then there's a 10% off code, which is just webinar. That's a little bit more detail about what we're actually going to be covering on that program as well. But yeah, sign up. It's going to be a pretty small group, which is how I like it. We tend to sort of cap the maximum numbers of about 35. And yeah, it's designed to be kind of small and intimate enough that we can see everyone on the screen, that we can get to know people sort of individually through it. And the tickets they're £150 plus the booking fee, so it's £160. I'd love to see you there. So there's the little plug for Kindful Leadership, and you can use that QR code on there, and I will just add the link right here. And Lee is here. Thank you. Lee is also doing exactly the same thing at the same time. Thank you, Lee. Always appreciate you, and yeah, always being one step ahead of me on those kind of things. So thank you, Lee. So let's take a few questions. Who's got a question? You can either put it in the Q&A or put it into the chat box. Either way, I'm just going to look through the chat that's come in while I was talking. See if there's any questions in there, but feel free to chuck stuff in the Q&A. This is a comment from Lee, actually, Think Productive team member here. This has been the most kind thing among many that I've been grateful for here at Think Productive. There have been several times when I've needed that tap out for several months. I've always known that the team has my back. Thank you, Lee. And I would say exactly the same thing. Oh, that's nice. Sarah saying, someone I know does wifles at the beginning of a meeting. I'd never heard that before. What I feel like expressing. That's really nice. What I feel like expressing. So that's a really good example of a cafe sospeso thing, right? Where you're just creating that little bit of space for people to just really be a little bit more human. And Emma saying, my manager does this love emails, and it's really boosting. Love it. Lorna, I really enjoy your Rev Up for the Week emails. Oh yeah, so this is the one last week on Rev Up for the Week was the equation happiness equals reality minus expectations, that was what I shared last week. Yeah, the reason I did that, I always write Rev Up for the Week as I write them for me, to be honest. And that was something that I'd been sort of ruminating over quite a lot as well. Question from Amanda, and then I'll get to the Q&A questions. So how do you remain kind when giving challenging feedback? So yeah, I think, so what Chris Kisley quite often talks about is the idea that truth and grace, the most important thing there is about being, the grace part is about being for the other person. So you're giving the feedback because you are committed to helping that person to grow. And I would sort of add on to that and say you're committed not only to helping that person to grow, but you're committed to that wider endeavor. So you're not giving challenging feedback to punish someone. You're not giving it to make someone feel bad. You're giving them the sort of data for them to improve, as well as for the project, the endeavor, whatever you're working on to improve as well. So I would say that, if you make that your emotional starting point, I think that's a really important sort of part of giving feedback. And often what that means in practice is dealing with your own shit first, like before you get in the room. So if you're angry with them or annoyed with them, like get that out of your system first, like have a conversation with another colleague or take it to your therapist or whatever it is. But don't be in the room if you still have those feelings and you still have those emotions around it. Like give yourself that cool off period to really kind of work through that first, I would say is really important there. Let's have a look at the Q&A question. So Rachel, do you think a kinder environment creates a more fun environment? Yeah, so there's lots of research actually, Rachel, around kindness and happiness. And there was a really good study that they did with workers at Coca-Cola in Spain, which you can look up, where basically the idea was people were asked to just do one kind thing in secret every day. And then they tracked a whole bunch of metrics, including happiness. And what they found was that, yeah, people were just having more fun at work. They were happier at work. They were less stressed at work, all just from these tiny like minuscule, like a few minutes a day kind of interactions, and it was just making a huge difference to productivity too. So I think, yes, kindness definitely just creates a more fun environment, a better environment to be in, and retention too, right? So think how much money we spend on recruiting people, training people up, and then they leave, and it's like, actually kindness is kind of free, right? Like it takes a little bit of time, but it doesn't really take too much extra sort of cash or resource to do it. But actually it's really kind of fueling that sense of kind of well-being and retention within organizations. Any tips? Lucy says, any tips on building confidence, moving from nice to kind? That is a lovely question, Lucy. I love that. I think so. I'm going to say that I want those tips too. I think a lot of people, including me, struggle with that. I'd say the key component that's different is truth. So nice tends to be inauthentic or dishonest often. So really getting comfortable with truth, and again, like, why are you doing that thing? Like, what's the sort of main reason that you're acting in a certain way, sharing a certain thing, like wanting to take that action? And I think often if you can get to the truth of it first, you tend to veer more towards kind than you do nice. But it's a really great question. I think nice is often easier. So I think it's a really important question to think about, and definitely one I think about a lot as well. And Louis is saying, do you give this session for companies? I wish my employer had this kind of approach. I've experienced the opposite. Unkind equals loss of colleagues. So I do a keynote on this. Yes, I do like an hour keynote on this. And then I've got a book which is coming out next year. And when that comes out, there's going to be a whole bunch of resources, both paid resources, and we're going to do a lot of free resources and sort of kind approaches to business, like pay what you want to do kind of thing for those as well. But the idea is to take this idea of kindness at work, Kindful Leadership, out into companies in as many different ways as we can. So that's all coming over the next few months. And Lee has just put a link to my kind keynote in the chat there as well, so you can grab it there if you want to find out more, and drop me a line. My email address is actually on the Zoom thing here as well, if you want to just drop me an email. That's the last question in the box, I think. Claire saying, I'm going to go and research psychological safety. Yes, it's fascinating. It's a really important area, and also I think often my experience is psychological safety and performance are really good hooks and really good Trojan horses to actually get people talking about kindness, because people often think kindness is too soft or weak, and all those things that hopefully this session has sort of proved to you that they are not. But like, if you start talking to people about psychological safety, retention, performance, well-being, then you tend to be knocking on a much more open door. And so if you're thinking about how to broach the subject of kindness with your bosses, I think that's a really good place to start as well. Cool. We are kind of out of time. What I'm going to do is, this is my little tradition in these webinars, is I will stick on here for another 15 minutes. So we'll do the after dark session. But those of you who had in your calendars a hard stop at 2:45, we're going to finish right there. So just to say thank you for being here. I'll leave on the screen if you want to take a little note of that QR code and have a think about joining us next week for Kindful Leadership. Please do. But I'll bring the formal session to a close right now. If you want to hang around and chat for another 15 minutes, we'll do that in After Dark. And thank you for being here.